Let's conduct a roll call first, starting on the left.
Schwartz, present.
Valentine, present.
Cook, present.
Terry Trumbull.
Commissioner Forcell, present.
Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak to anything not on the agenda? Not seeing any. We'll go to minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes or a motion?
Absent comments, I move approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented by staff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. That's a 6-0 vote. Okay, agenda review. I do have some revisions. I hope it's not too confusing. I'd like to move item number 6, which talks about the strategic plan, to be the first item. And item number 4 to be the second item. And then we'll proceed in the remaining order of the items as they're left. Okay. Reports from commissioners' meetings or events, are there any?
Yes?
Great.
Okay, hi, everyone. So on Monday, I attended the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative Consumer Symposium at Distributech in San Diego, where I moderated a session on safely unlocking the value of consumer data. Jesse Burse, who is the founder of the Smart Cities Council, gave a keynote about the intersection between smart cities and utilities, and focusing specifically on resilience, microgrids, distributed generation, renewables, storage, and how that is affected by having the sensor technology and integration. He talked about smart buildings and smart streetlights as being sort of the gateway application that sort of gets a lot of things going. And one of the things he showed was a smartphone app from Dubai Now that is, they have a smart city initiative there that is really quite amazing. And the app they had was terrific. And I just looked at that and I thought, God, I think people in Palo Alto would love this. So anyway, I just thought that's something
What does it do?
It does everything. It sort of connects all these different things. And anyway, so I'll hand you afterwards, I have the URL for you. There was the municipal utility from Fort Collins, Colorado, won the Clear Award, the Utility Clear Award from SGCC for their Peak Partners program, which is a combination of a demand response and energy efficiency effort geared to ease up their electric consumption at peak times, and Efficiency Works, which is a regional program that they're part of, which focuses on water and electricity efficiency for businesses and homes by offering audits, rebates, lighting, and access to Energy Star appliances. And, I think they're a really good example of a not too big utility that could have some very good lessons for us. They're kind of one of the rock stars in the area. Then there was something that was very, I think, relevant to things we've been talking about. So among the panelists on the customer experience and expectation session was a woman named Katie Espeth, who is the VP of New Products at EPB in Chattanooga. And so I had an opportunity to ask her about their fiber installation, and she reinforced that they did the deployment primarily for smart grid capabilities, which have proven very valuable. Their reduction in how many outages they've had with the kind of storms they've got has just been tremendous. And I asked her about the telecom business, and she said they added that line of business to make the city more attractive to businesses because they'd been in an economic slump, and this has really made a difference for them to be able to attract business to the area. Now, because they were not being well served by the commercial players, she said they were sort of really at the bottom of what AT&T and Comcast were doing. You know, they were not seen as an attractive market. That was why they were able to add the residential television and internet services, and she said they have a 55% market share, and the reason they do it is because it throws off cash for the rest of their operation. And she said this past year it contributed $31 million to their utility. And what she told me was that, and I have no idea in terms of the legal, if there's a difference in legality with California versus Tennessee, but she said while it is legal in their jurisdiction for telecom services to contribute cash to the electricity side of the business, it is illegal to go the other direction. So you can't use, you know, money generated from the electric utility to pay for telecom. And then after the session, I specifically asked her if there were any new applications that had been enabled by fiber being available to home residents, and she was not able to name anything beyond the standard broadband, entertainment, and communication applications. On the energy side, she really talked about how it's really enabled effective usage feedback, more community solar, and prepay, which appeals to their large population of renters. And you know, I think later on when we talk about the energy efficiency programs and how many renters we have in Palo Alto, I think that actually is very relevant, because prepay is one of those things that gets very large reductions in energy usage. It just results in, you know, like 14 to 17% reductions in people's usage when they're paying attention to it, and it's their own money. So anyway, I thought it was very good. And anyway, it was a good conference, and hopefully I'm working on something for this July, and I hope that I can, for the National Town Meeting, and I really hope I can get either some of the other commissioners or some of the staff to come to that event. Anyway, thank you.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Schwartz. Anything else, anyone? Okay, Director of Utilities report, please.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. I have a few items of updates to provide, just information for the Commission and for the public. First is just to note, for those who might be interested, that there are open application call for the Silicon Valley Water Conservation Awards. The Silicon Valley Water Conservation Awards Coalition is seeking applications and nominations for businesses, organizations, agencies, and individuals who have demonstrated excellence in water conservation. City of Palo Alto Utilities is a coalition member and received the award for Water Utility of the Year in 2014. This year's deadline to submit an application or nomination is right this week, Friday, February 3rd. Details and a link to the application form is available on waterawards.org. The award ceremony will be held on Water World Day, March 22nd. And so it's an opportunity to recognize our community heroes for water conservation. Let's see, in terms of water supply conditions, based upon our current season and storms, storage in the Hetch Hetchy Regional Water System is essentially full based upon recent storms. At this point, however, Governor Brown has not declared an end to the drought, and the State Water Resources Control Board is proposing to end the emergency water conservation regulation, or extend the emergency water conservation regulation through the end of May 2017. Decision on this is expected next week on February 7th. The impact of extending that regulation would be negligible to Palo Alto, given that we've already reestablished a 0% state mandated conservation target and are currently on track to save more than 20% compared to our baseline year of 2013. The much improved water supply situation may cause some customers to wonder why the drought surcharge is still in effect, both in Palo Alto as well as elsewhere. Surcharge was implemented to cover the mostly fixed cost of operating the water system during the time when water sales and revenue have been down. Slight rebound in water sales is predicted, and reserve levels are healthy enough that staff we do expect to be recommending elimination of the drought surcharge as a part of our upcoming budget. Note for one of our utilities employees, winning an award, a little bit of an inside baseball award in the power agencies in Northern California. So congratulations to Utility Supervisor John Reinert, who not only monitors and delivers millions of gallons of high-quality drinking water here in the city every day, but also produces an award-winning wine in his off hours. John isn't working. He and his wife Stacy run Brilliant Mistake Wines, and their Cabernet Sauvignon was the top red wine choice at the friendly, quote-unquote friendly competition at the Northern California Power Agency Strategic Issues Conference last month. And so in particular, both myself and now Mayor Scharf were very pleased to take that prize away from other agencies that believe themselves to be the heart of wine country. Let's see. And finally, more somber, serious note, but also recognition on, with regard to Art Rosenfeld, unofficially known as the godfather of energy efficiency in the utility industry, passed away last week, Friday, at the age of 90. Did not have the pleasure of knowing Mr. Rosenfeld. Over the span of the past 4 decades, he has tirelessly advocated for energy efficiency, from developing energy efficiency technologies for lighting and windows to persuading policymakers and utilities to invest in megawatts instead of power plants. Mr. Rosenfeld was instrumental in helping the California Energy Commission adopt the state's Title 24 energy standards, which set the most stringent building energy code in the country. California's per capita energy usage has remained flat since the mid-1970s, whereas the rest of the country has experienced a 50% growth in per capita energy use. Palo Alto is a direct beneficiary of the Rosenfeld effect, as it's known, and the energy code and utility energy efficiency program tools that Palo Alto has used to keep our electric load flat or declining over the past few decades are largely due in large part to his efforts. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Any commissioner comments? We have no unfinished business, so I'd like to move to the first item of new business, which is number 6 on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'll do a brief overview. This will be somewhat the first bite at the apple. You will notice when we get to the look ahead of the calendar that we've actually put the strategic plan every month on your agenda. Now, certainly your prerogative, as we've talked about potentially having an ad hoc committee or other means for you to stay engaged with this, but we see the opportunity to have discussion with the Commission really now through the end of the calendar year as a good means to stay in touch as we make progress. So let me do a brief overview. I obviously wasn't here in 2011 when the current strategic plan was adopted. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Down. There we go. Okay. And in fact, received a couple of questions from commissioners since sending out the initial PowerPoints. We've actually elaborated it a bit. So it's what you have now that I'll go through here and hopefully in front of you provides a little more information on a couple of the last slides. So by way of agenda, we'll break this out into providing a brief overview of the 2011 strategic plan, as well as our preliminary thoughts on the current, what we'll refer to as the 2017 utility strategic plan. So in terms of background, again, the current framework that the organization has been using for identifying our ongoing strategic priorities, initiatives, and monitoring it was adopted in 2011. We have staff that has been reporting on it periodically since that time, and so now, since it's been close to 6 years, that it's a good opportunity for us to provide an update. It establishes our existing vision, mission, and objectives, focused, as you see here, on safety, reliability, customer service excellence, cost management, and environmental sustainability. That existing strategic plan was built around the balanced scorecard framework that I'll jump to a graphic in a moment that really describes the way in which those objectives were put into specific priorities and again reported since that point in time. Now I messed up. There we go. So again, this infographic providing our objectives at the very top, again, from safety and reliability to care for our environment, with a number of perspectives from the customer's perspective at the top, through our internal business processes, people and technology, and our financial resources, as providing the framework through which we've been monitoring and implementing a number of specific and strategic priorities over the past several years. The existence of this current strategic plan, or the last adoption of the strategic plan, really does provide us a good launching point for the work that's upcoming. And in fact, we'd expect that the first steps will be to do something of an inventory, and in fact, we're planning to bring back to you next month the current snapshot on where we are in implementation of the existing strategic plan. So then going forward, this is new. We added, again, a rough outline of some of the initial thoughts on how we will approach the 2017 strategic plan, recognizing we have the existing framework, the existing initiatives that had been identified in 2011 and updated since, while also recognizing that we are in a time of extraordinary change and evolution, in particular of the energy field and energy environment. So this graphic, effectively through the little steps here, some of the process we'd expect to go through, starting, and again, very conceptual. We do expect to release a consultant RFP soon that will give us some assistance, and recognizing that the different consulting companies that are in this field each have their own approach, and so we want to maintain some flexibility on how we might adapt this to their approach and vice versa. But basically, the steps that we'll expect to undertake would be to identify existing key policy, program, and operating drivers, again, largely based upon previously identified and initiatives underway, including both the strategic plan as well as council directives that have been implemented since over the next couple of months, shown here as February, March. An opportunity to identify and understand emerging issues as a next step. A SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on our ability to implement both what's new as well as areas that we've struggled on since the existing plan. And then looking at our operational needs, then leading into the fall in order to ensure we're in alignment with the goals identified, and then ending with a recap of our strategic priorities and implementation actions. Hopefully, really getting through this process by the end of the calendar year. That would be our target, while recognizing we need to maintain flexibility for the process as it unfolds. On the left, we're showing the UAC with input opportunities and consultation throughout. We would certainly hope that UAC would be able to engage in all of these steps throughout. And perhaps on the right side here, a little bit of a contrast that with the City Council, the check-ins would be on the front end in terms of our completeness in identifying both the existing directives as well as the emerging issues, do a check-in with them, and then really from that point allow us to be more detailed in the work that we undertake before going back to them, really toward the end of the process ultimately for adoption. And then at the bottom here, staff engagement through an ongoing focus team as well as larger workshops, again, every step along the way. Our hope in trying to get through this calendar year is really out of recognition that if it does extend much beyond that, that there's the potential to lose the engagement. And I'll say that, you know, having worked now with the department from a personal perspective for the better part of a year, I think the engagement of staff is really going to be critical as a part of this exercise, that maintaining that focus, maintaining the interest among a variety of staff perspectives that will ultimately need to lead to implementation is going to be very important given where the organization is in this particular point in time. And again, the variety of issues that we expect may come up. And then on the next slide, just to get a sort of a teaser, recognizing that the questions and the variety of issues that we'll want to take on and that will come up as a part of the discussions and the assessment of some of the key issues to be addressed, provided just a few examples of some of the questions that we expect will come up and that would really drive both the recognition of the importance of this, both with staff as well as with our community stakeholders going forward. So just, I won't read each of these verbatim, but to note that the questions raised include everything from our governance structure and how we determine rates and our evaluating our ongoing costs, to distributed generation, number 2, generation as well as storage, and how that is and can perhaps be reflected in the investments we're doing on the utility side, how that should be factored in, as well as, and I'm sure we'll get into discussion somewhat of reliability and resilience dimensions of those investments. Electrification we'll speak to actually next month in great detail, and potential impacts or effects on the gas utility. Number 4, how we engage in energy conservation, and, you know, somewhat interchangeably known as behavior-informed or behavior modification programs. As a public agency, I'm always very squeamish about talking, getting involved in behavior modifications, so want to do that very carefully. And number 5, purple pipe, recycled water distribution, ongoing work, just starting on strategic planning for the recycled water as a source, this question of distribution system and how our investments should proceed there. And then the last 2, 6 and 7, really pointing to organizational operations and the workforce characteristics that would be important in order to deliver on the priorities identified and our safety and reliability priorities, how we're measuring that and how we manage that going forward. So with that, again, just really a setup and for the purpose of having the opportunity to get your initial thoughts as we embark on this, and perhaps some next steps on how the UAC would like to engage on this going forward.
Great, thank you. Are there any members of the public that want to speak on this item? Okay, then it's up to us. So I wanted to address this one first. I think this is going to be something that we see again and again. And did you say we'd maybe have it at each meeting? That's great.
As a standing item.
Yeah, I think that that's important for us to be able to. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Maybe if you turn off your mic. No, it didn't make a difference. Okay. So I think it's going to be really important for us to be engaged in this and to be giving feedback to the staff, and as all of us should be involved in it. So I look forward to going through this process with the other commissioners and with the staff. Any other questions, comments from anyone? This will be a long process, so there'll be plenty of chance to put input, but I would like to hear if you have anything today. Commissioner Schwartz.
Hi, so I definitely have some colleagues, industry colleagues, who have their own companies who I think could be fabulous and would really get that. So what is the appropriate way to recommend somebody so I don't do it in any kind of way that's
Crosses any lines.
Right,
Appreciate
right,
that.
exactly,
Yes.
because I know, I mean, I just know some of the best people in the industry who I think would be very willing to help us.
Great. Would very much like to get contact information, so if you could give that to me, then we'll run it through our RFP process. We'll make sure that they're included.
Okay. Thank you. And then I just want to say about behavior modification, you know, that's just a term of art that has been used for things like the O-Power, you know, products and things like that. And it just is, it's just, there's a whole Beck conference, you know, it's just something that is the way people in the industry are talking about it. And so it's not really nefarious. It's just the idea of pushing triggers and incentives to people that get them to shift their usage in a way that matches the goals of the utility to be more efficient in how it runs. So to anybody in the public who's either watching or listening, it's not a nefarious concept.
As a newcomer to the industry, I've had many discussions with staff on how that term just doesn't serve the industry very well. And so that may be one that we note early on and then move on and don't use it.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the second item on the agenda, which is number 4 on the agenda, and then we'll go back in the order of the regular schedule.
Good evening, Commissioners. Eric Henniston, Acting Utilities Rates Manager. So tonight, I always get to be the bad guy and bringing for you the preliminary financial forecast for the electric, gas, water, and wastewater collection side. Tonight, we'd like to do this in February. Next month, we're going to be bringing to you the water and wastewater financial, the ones that we're going to be taking forward, moving out. Gas and electric come the month afterwards. Tonight, we also, in the piece that I show you here, we have the refuse rate projections for information so you can get a sense of what the total bill impact is going to be. And on the happy note, rate increases of the overall, we're looking at something slightly less than what we had last year. So good news. As a review, since if some of you might not be aware, a few years ago we had a restructuring of how we did reserves. In FY15, in response to a city auditor's report, we used to have just one rate stabilization reserve. It was uber general. The minimum and maximum guidelines for how much we kept in there was a very loose concept. We firmed that up and we came forth with a new set of reserve guidelines and policies. We took that one rate stabilization reserve, split it into a few different ones. I think the one that we're going to really discuss tonight is the operations reserve. And that's the primary contingency reserve that we use for dealing with variances in budget, and it's our day-to-day. In general, we try to keep between 90 to 105 days of expenses in there. On the low end, it's about 60 days of expenses. On the high end, 120 to 150. So those are our minimum and maximum bands. There's one additional line which you'll see out there, which is called the risk assessment level. And that takes our maximum revenue variance that we've seen like over the last several years, and we also take 10% of CIP costs, as well as sort of if all the bad things happen, what is the minimum amount of money that we would want to have. Now, the chances that all of that happens in one particular time really wouldn't happen, but that's sort of our comfort level. We have the additional reserves, rate stabilization, unassigned, CIP. These are used for various purposes, CIP, obviously. I'll move forward on this one. Let's get to the meat. Our initial review right now is we're looking at a 12% rate increase on the electric fund, no rate increase for the gas, 2% in wastewater, 6% water, and 5% in refuse. Storm drain goes up by CPI, so between 2 to 3% on average. The bill impact change that we're looking at is about 5%, and looking at about 4 to 5% in the out years overall. And like I said, this is less than what we were looking at last year. We were thinking we might need an overall of about 9, and then that would taper off. It's more of a flat trajectory now, which we generally also like. It's, you know, more something that people can bet on.
Before you move into electric.
So the normal rate adoption process that we use here. So we bring to you tonight, we'll bring to you the preliminary view, like I said. Next month, we bring to the UAC water and wastewater. And then we bring that again, we take that to Finance Committee the following month. We do water and wastewater early because there's a 45-day timeline or gap between when the council hearing is and when we have to mail out Prop 218 notices. Probably all of you have received those at some point in time. We have to inform of any rate changes that go on with the water, wastewater, and refuse funds. So because of timing issues, that's why we bring those so much earlier. Electric and gas don't have the same noticing requirements, but all rates are heard and approved on the council adoption night in June. So.
And I think one key point to add just for new commissioners, generally we'll do a review of our finances and our rates every year, and we will come to you through this whole entire process, and we'll either say no rate increases are needed, or we'll propose a rate for adoption, a rate change for adoption on July 1st. And so it's an annual process that you'll be seeing.
Yes, normally if say, for instance, in the gas, if we're not proposing a rate change, we don't bring the rate schedules around and have them readopted at their old level. They just continue in perpetuity until such time as they change. So moving forward to electric, as I said, we're looking at needing a 12% rate increase and an 8% in FY19. One of the reasons why we're going to need such large increases is that our operations reserves are below minimum. We knew this last year. We've seen this. Costs have been increasing. We've been using reserves over time. The last time that we had, prior to the July 2016 rate increase, the last time that we'd had a rate change was July 2009. So it'd been quite a while. We're hoping to have a slightly smaller rate increase this year, but with the increase that we had, we saw one cost increase with relation to our renewables costs coming online. Transmission access charges were higher than what we'd expected them to be and what we'd budgeted, but also customers cut back. We saw about a 6% reduction in customer usage. So all that revenue that we were hoping to get, it got cut significantly. We don't know quite how much more cutback we'll see. This is first, like I said, the first time we've had a rate increase in a long time in this utility. So we're seeing a little bit of an elasticity effect. We're hoping we won't see much more, but things will change as we move forward. One of the other main things to note here, in addition, we've been using reserves to try and keep to help with the reserve situation. But the big one here that's new is a proposed $10 million transfer from the Special Projects Reserve into the Distribution Reserve. This is kind of to keep things above the minimum level. And the plan is to repay this starting at like the end of FY20, get that back in, because that reserve is truly meant for special projects. We can take a loan from it from a short period of time, but we need to pay it back. Things that we're also thinking about doing later this year, hydro rate adjusters. As I said, in the future, one of the things that will really tap the Electric Special Projects Reserve is smart grid. We're going to start spending on that in fiscal year 19. The long-term increases, as I said, are renewables, transmission access. Drought has been a short-term impact. As was mentioned earlier, it looks like the drought is pretty much over, but we don't know how much longer any restrictions might come to us from state and beyond. So moving on to this graph, we'll see in every single fund. The line up at the top is our projected actual revenues going back 5 years and projected revenues going forward. And you can see here on the electric commodity side, the blue bar, that costs are increasing, and that again is due to renewables and transmission charges. Capital investment has been staying strong in this fund, spending pretty much what has been planned. Their operations had a slight dip in 2016 for one reason. For that big one, we've had a hard time keeping staff. We don't have the people that we need to in that fund. And now we've had to bring on a lot of contractors in FY17 to help to get things moving along. So
it seems like there's a trade-off, because if you pay too little, then you can't attract people for the jobs, and then you have to have contractors where the expenses, in some respects, they can be more expensive. So what kind of like sensitivity analysis have you done that it might be better to have people who are trained and committed and have the institutional memory by paying them a more competitive wage?
Go ahead.
So it's a combination of, I'll defer to some extent we'll defer to some extent on the pay issue. But there are more to the staffing issues than just pay, though. Finding linemen and maintenance workers in the electric industry and engineers is difficult because there aren't as many people coming into the industry behind the people who are retiring. So PG&E is having the same problem we are. Every other electric utility is having the same problem bringing people on.
So I think I am struggling to get past the sensitivity analysis, because I'd say in a perfect world we'd do that. The reality is I think we're not even close to having that level of sophistication. I think we recognize the issue, and I think the struggle I'm having is I'm splitting my brain along the city manager's office hat with the utility director's hat, where from a citywide workforce perspective, the utility compensation scales are actually, and compensation scale is not the right term, maybe it's the market comparison, is unique. And so reconciling that uniqueness and the competitive environment that Jonathan points out among the utilities with the competitive environment that exists among the city, more general city workforce, I think is an ongoing debate, and one that, as the council looks at compensation scales, that monitoring the vacancy levels, the ability to attract and retain, versus the cost for contracted services is, again, an ongoing dynamic, but one that doesn't have the level of sophistication of a sensitivity analysis, unfortunately.
Do we reach out to, IEEE does some really interesting things in trying to cultivate, to get students to kind of go in this direction, and they have some really, really good programs, especially trying to attract women engineers and things like that. Is that something that we're hooked into?
To a certain extent. I don't know how active we are with IEEE in particular. We do certainly through NCPA, as well as through our own professional organizations.
And then I'd really encourage you to talk to some folks, and I'm happy to make an introduction to the IEEE Power and Energy Society, because people like Wanda Reeder have done just some amazing things to try, and I think that to just stay in our own little public power world in California may not be we live in a phenomenal place. So the idea that people might want to come and work here from other parts of the country, I know it's expensive, but that we might be able to attract some people because we live in such a great place. And anyway, so maybe we just need to widen our net a little bit. That's all I'm suggesting.
thank you. So there we go. The net effect for supply side is that, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be going through and using rate stabilization and hydro reserves, using those up over the next year or two. And where that leads us to is, like I said, the supply operations reserve is currently below minimum. Now, we do have a plan in general within our reserve policy. When reserves drop below minimum, it's our goal to try and bring it up quickly, if possible. Now, if it's going to spike rates, we also say that the general goal is to try and bring the reserve back up to target within the forecast period. So in this case, we're looking at like over the next 5 years or so, bringing us on a trajectory to try and get rates and get revenues back up to a path where we are at where we want to be.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
And if you want to defer this until you're done with presenting about reserves, but I just wanted to seed the question. I wasn't on the UAC, but I attended a meeting when the last time that rates were discussed. And if I recall, the explanation for why rates had to make a sudden jump after many years of not being raised was that we had been purposefully drawing down the reserves, which is why we hadn't raised rates. And now they're below the minimum. Can you help me understand? Was that a conscious decision to keep drawing down the reserve until it was below the minimum and then raise rates? Or was it just things didn't work out as planned? Or is it sort of one reserve fund versus a different one and I'm getting confused?
No, it was a confluence of events. The plan was to draw down reserves and try to keep things above minimum, but we also had sales loss. And so it fed into the whole, it was a bunch of things that brought us into the position where we're at right now.
I just heard that for a second. So it's a combination of purposeful and events. So there are multiple reserves. There was a rate stabilization reserve that was used for spreading rates across multiple years, and that was purposefully drawn down. There was also an operations reserve and hydro stabilization reserve that were intended for situations like we just had, where the drought creates seriously increased power supply costs for us. And those were drawn down quickly. They were drawn down a little bit more quickly than we expected this year. We expected to be somewhere in this ballpark, but we're a little lower than we expected to be because of the sales decreases we saw.
One of the other things that was striking as we went through it last year that surprised me is that there turned out to be extremely little latitude for how to structure the rates once the exercise of restructuring was initiated, and that a cost of services analysis had to be performed, and that determined exactly how the increase in rates would be allocated. So while as a progressive community, we might want to set higher rates for users of more energy, once you actually look at the COSA results, the explanation was that's basically out unless it turns out that City Council were to set some guidance that would then let you do that. And barring that, once the rates were restructured, it basically turned out that it was interesting that for very large users of electricity, my recollection, it was actually slightly positive, but for residential customers, it ended up having a fairly substantial increase. So once I understood that, I could certainly understand why the group might have delayed that as long as possible.
Thank you. So on the distribution reserve side, as I said, our reserves currently, we're planning on, I can just skip by this. Reserves here are low, and I'll just go right to here. Because we had reduced sales, and because of situations, we're seeing that our distribution operations reserves are below minimum. Again, it's the plan that we want to bring this back up to target, and the rate increases that we're proposing should hopefully do this. Now, all that said, the net effect on where we're planning on going with rates, last year we were thinking we might do a 10% followed by a 3%. We're looking at a 12 followed by a 9, so it is higher. But this, it's not, I don't think it's tremendously higher, at least in FY18, than where we're planning on being last time around. FY19 will be higher, but again, we're expecting the costs are going to be increasing for us, and we need to make up those reserve differences. Big uncertainties.
And of course, the outer years are much harder to predict. So even that, the 2019 one is kind of hard to predict at this point.
Everything really beyond, in 2019 onward is an estimate. And going into future uncertainties, if, say, things turn around or the drought conditions, hydro conditions go poor for us, that can have effects on us. If customers dramatically cut back usage, that can have an effect on us. Transmission charges go up, and the litany goes on of all the potentials out there. FY18, we're fairly confident where things are going, but FY19 onwards, it's our best hope that that's where we'll be. Large costs that could be out there in the future, a second transmission line, cost of smart grid implementation. And we know that we've been seeing increasing CIP costs pretty much across the board in all of our utilities. After the recession, the bids that we've been getting have been coming in higher. And it's just a fact that we're seeing increased cost. You'll see more of that when we get to the water, gas, wastewater side. And with that, that's electric. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Just one thing. One thing that I just want to really make sure to call your attention to here, the reserve levels that we're showing, our operations, our contingency reserve, being able to achieve those levels depends on a short-term temporary loan from the Electric Special Projects Reserve. So we need to be conscious of that. It's typically been something we do not touch. The intent is to repay that fund within the next 2 years.
Moving on to gas. Gas is a happier story. Right now we're looking at no need for a rate increase in FY18. And going forward on that, roughly just inflationary level changes. The reason for that, and one thing you can look at here in the orange bar, the orange bar shows capital investment costs, CIP. You notice back in 2014, 2015, we had a drop. There was a bunch of backlog projects, and we did a temporary delay in budgeting with relation to that. So that helped there. In FY this year, FY17 and moving into FY18, again, we have some projects that are causing some delays. The University Avenue project, getting everything tied in together for the water, the wastewater, and the gas, getting all those to get mixed together so that we only do one cut. That's causing a bunch of delays in getting that project implemented and started. Two, as I mentioned earlier, CIP costs are coming in higher when it comes to bid. We're getting fewer bids, and the ones that we're getting are above what we estimated. So in some cases, we have to turn around, redraw the plans, and then repackage and rebid the project as it is. These are all delays. So right now, what we're looking at doing is the FY17 project is going to get delayed out to FY19, and everything's rolled out, basically pushed back 2 years. This is the same story you're going to see in gas, water, and wastewater. What the effect that this has is, whereas last year that revenue line was going to be below the cost, the expenses, we're a little bit, we're a little bit below or like right at. So in this case, we seem to be doing well for the gas. The other thing you'll notice in FY16, gas supply costs were low. That's, again, a combination of just low sales. During drought years, we noticed that gas also goes down along with water. People use less hot water, so the two of them kind of are combined. We have seen an increase in gas usage, just like we've seen an increase in water usage. So we can tell that people are easing up out of the drought period. The other thing that we have going on there is gas commodity costs have been relatively low, and we saw a settlement related to the San Bruno case. So that helped reduce costs in FY16. The other operations and all the other costs are increasing by roughly about inflation moving forward. For here on the gas, when it comes to reserves, it had been our plan, has always been our plan to try and use the rate stabilization reserve within the next 2 to 3 years, and then to moderate rate increases. In this case, we had outstanding rate stabilization reserves. We'll continue to use those over time and try to get that reserve down to 0. That's been our plan, but we can do so without having to increase rates by that much correspondingly. And we see that here the operations reserve is going to be right at target, or planned to be right about at target. So, happy news. Last year we projected that we would need about a 9% rate increase, followed by an 8%. Now those have all come down now. So, again, things there are uncertainties in the gas side, long-term decrease in cost due to fuel switching. That'll be brought up in the strategic plan. Other things that will be of concern going 2020 and outwards, what happens with the California Cap and Trade program. Currently, we get a bunch of allowances from the states. Some of them we have to turn around and sell, then we have to purchase any remainder to make up our gas load. Some discussions right now going on to the state are that there might be a radical decrease in how many free allowances we get post-2020. We may get none, and then will we be forced to buy all of those allowances on the market, or will they go away? Will cap and trade go away and they move to a carbon tax? These are all uncertainties and things that we're evaluating moving forward. So any questions on the gas side?
I guess, one of the things, that we're working on this commissioner memo, and one of the things that always makes me uncomfortable is as if it's a done deal about fuel switching, when I don't think that the issues have really been adequately discussed. And so is it possible to not present it as a done deal and frame it more that this is something that's going to be discussed? Because it may be that if we actually look at, sort of our actual carbon footprint reduction, we may want to make a different decision. And if we're worried about gas leaks, then we may want to participate in an innovative way to check for leakages. Might be a better thing to do than because here you have a commodity that is coming down in price that isn't requiring you have to raise rates. And if it's actually also more efficient as the way to heat our houses, it seems to me to not make a lot of sense to sort of have this other assumption. So is that something that's possible?
No, I think in this case we've tried to show it as an uncertainty. We're not sure whether or not if there will be fuel switch, if any reduction in consumption or fuel switching going forward. And it's not. In this case, we haven't assumed that any fuel switching will in fact take place. So that in that case, yes, it is an uncertainty. So, no.
I think your point's well taken, though, and we'll ensure it both in the way that maybe the connotation of the way the information is presented, as well as the fact that it's not taken as a done deal.
Moving on to wastewater. Here we're looking at about a 2% rate increase, small change to residential bills. As you can see here, same story, FY17-18, we're looking at a deferment of capital projects. So there, once that ends, though, you can see that the costs do go above where our revenue projections are. So we do still anticipate the need to want to increase rates to get us to a level where we're matching revenues with costs. One thing here that we also noticed, it's something that's come up in the past, there's really two sets of capital expense when you're talking about wastewater. There's a capital improvement cost for the wastewater mains out in the street, and then there's a set of capital costs that actually come from the treatment plant, and a set of operations costs related to the treatment plant, and that's made up in those blue bars. The treatment plant in total is shared by a bunch of agencies, not just Palo Alto. So there's Palo Alto, a few different people we all pay into that to keep that plant going. This here represents Palo Alto's share of treatment cost operations. So it just gives you a better sense of how much is split where. And we'll have more of an explanation when we get into, when we bring you the actual financial plans, more detailed data related to this. So. Here again, reserves are relatively healthy. In fact, we're going to be above target for a little while and then dropping back down just in the short term because of the reduced CIP cost. Last year, we were expecting that we would need something in the order of a 10 and then a 9%. Those have dropped, and we're leveling out to say like 6 or 7% going forward. As I mentioned earlier, higher main replacement costs in the future. We might have to reduce the size of projects. We might, in getting projects to where they all come together at the same time, these can cause delays and increased cost. Any question? That's it for wastewater, if anybody has any questions. Okay, water. I think we've all become a little bit inured. Water's perpetually on the rate increase track. This time we're proposing a 6% rate increase. It's less than what we had last time around, or what we were expecting last time around. SFPUC is, of course, planning on raising their rates. And as Ed mentioned, we're looking at ending the drought surcharge. Unless, actually, yes, we're going to be ending the drought surcharge at this point in time. One thing we're planning on doing this time around is also because the SFPUC doesn't pass their rate proposals until the very end of the process in like May and June, we will probably come to you with a proposal to make that a pass-through. That is allowed under California state law, and then we'll, very similar to how we do gas, when we find out what the rate is going to be, that's what we'll pass it on to customers. So that'll help us absorb the shock. Say, for instance, this year, we hoped that it was going to be $4.01. It actually turned out to be $4.10 per CCF. So, coming forward as early as we do to make that all the meeting processes in the 45-day timeline, we're really working with very early information with regards to that. So, yes, as you can see here, 6% rate increases moving forward. Again, after the two-year budget hiatus for 17-18, again, we expect that expenses will be higher than revenues, so we still see the need to do some sort of rate increase, at least in the prompt 2 years. It will take the reserves, and here's an infographic just showing like how water wholesale rates have been going over the last several years, nothing but up. We will project that operations reserves will be eaten into a little bit going forward, even with these rate projections. But for the short term, reserves are at maximum. You have actually even a little bit higher than maximum. But those cost increases that we're seeing coming in FY19, 20, 21, it's going to start really driving into our operations reserves. So that's why, whereas in the other ones we said, we can get away with not doing much of anything in FY18, here we still say that having a solid 6% rate track is probably the best way to go for this fund. Last year we were thinking that we might need 9%. So in this respect, it's happier news than we were coming back last time. Again, uncertainties with water, what is usage level going to be? Just coming out of a drought, one of the things that always happens is that from where water usage starts off before the drought happens and where it ends at the very height of the drought, and then you start seeing recovery, where will it recover to? That's the million-dollar question. Usually we estimate that it'll come about half of where it was from between the bottom to where we started it at, and that's about where it'll start to level off. So far, things look to be coming right about that way, but that can take anywhere from 3 to 4 years to see that materialize. So a lot of things are still in flux with relation to this. And again, capital improvement uncertainties. Additional issues related to water, we recycled water project. This is probably the big one going out there. It's something we'll be analyzing, something we'll be tackling moving forward. So we've started that ball rolling this year. So we'll be seeing, coming up with some better estimations of what that might cost. Additional work, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission just finished one of the largest, I believe in the country, largest ever, seismic improvement work. And so they just finished working on that whole line, and they're continually issuing bonds as they move forward, part of the reason why the costs continue to go up for water. But one of the things they're doing right now is looking at Mountain Tunnel, and that's shut down for probably about the next month or so while they evaluate that. That was not in the original project. If they come back and they realize they're going to need a lot of work on that, that could be an additional cost that's going to get passed on to us again through our water rates. So anything, that would be my end of my presentation related to water. Any questions?
Let's just check, are there any public comment? No, okay. Questions, comments?
If I might, perhaps before turning to the commission, I would just lend the personal perspective that Eric has the gift of being a really optimistic person, and appreciate that, especially when you're delivering news such as we've just talked about. I, on the other hand, have a little more, I'll say, apprehension going forward, and would just like to express to the commission that while we recognize the drivers of the cost and we take a highly analytical perspective to this, that we do recognize that at the end of the day we're talking about rates that impact people, and that as we progress through our budget development process, we will continue to look at the drivers of cost, and to the extent that we can develop strategies that mitigate the impact on ratepayers, we absolutely will continue to pursue that. Again, recognizing that any rate increase is not good news and needs to be couched as such.
I actually had a question back on you said that for the electric utility that we're going to have to be building up the reserves because they're below the minimum levels. What percentage of revenues are you anticipating would go into those reserves to build those back?
What percentage of revenues to go in? So as you can see right now, even though we're proposing a 12% rate increase, we're still going to be below expenses. So in the short term, there will be sort of a maintaining or even an additional hit a little bit to existing reserves. We won't really start adding into that until, say, FY19 and getting ourselves thoroughly replenished on that side. So we're trying to feed in and bring in more, but I don't know if I have an exact percentage of revenues that goes towards that. It's not something I know off the top of my head, but it's something I can bring back to you when we do further discussions on this.
But basically, if you looked at the charts that show the show you're building the reserves back, that shows the slope of the amount you're adding to the reserve fund.
Yes. But I don't. So offhand, I do not know the percentage of how much we're actually trying to add in any particular year given, but I can.
I think a really key point to note here is that it's not the primary driver of the rate increases. It's a relatively small piece of the revenue.
That's
and
what I was
really what it
kind of
affects
trying to
more
get
is
to.
the pace that you can increase rates. We have to increase it at a faster pace.
So my question is, with the rate increases that we've had, what kind of feedback are you getting from people either in calls, on social media, or whatever? And do you keep some kind of dashboard that you do internally to track that? So that you know kind of the nature of what people are, like, are there a lot of people complaining? Is nobody complaining?
Personally, I have not had complaints. I'll be honest, for me, most of the calls I get are from businesses. They're curious about long-range forecasting, and it's mainly curiosity, so I don't get, maybe perhaps,
No, well, we don't have formal reports, just talking informally with the customer service representatives. In past years, we've actually had much more significant spikes in calls than we have this year, surprisingly, because we had a lot higher rate increases than we did in the past. I think we've done a better job of communicating over the last few years, and communicating not just what's happening this year, but that there are several years of rate increases coming up, and what the reasons for those are. I mean, it's investment in good things. It's investment in the water supply improvement projects, seismic rehabilitation of that Hetch Hetchy system. It's renewable energy. It's, capital investment in our system. I mean, there are good reasons for this, and we're also helped, I think, by the nationwide discussion about infrastructure, needed infrastructure investment too. So I think people are coming to expect some level of increase needed for those types of things.
But we would be happy, and we'll bring back some further information, more specifically on the feedback that we did receive from customers. Jonathan, you might also note, though, the reaction that you've concluded there was a significant reduction in actual demand, and perhaps even more so than we expected.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to give you like an extra thing to do, so that's not, I just was curious because, yeah, but I was just curious what kind of reactions. And so in some of the trade press, there's a lot of discussion about how electric rates are dropping across the country. And so, we're sort of in this weird bubble area where PG&E is continuing to, we're still way lower than PG&E. But so, I just don't know how much is an anomaly, or people just not noticing, or are they really upset and we just don't know?
Eric, are you going to have to redo your cost of services analysis, or can you leverage the one you just finished?
For the most part, you can leverage what was done in the previous cost of service. You don't usually have to redo the entirety of the analysis. If things change radically with regards to customer dynamics or with regards to cost profiles, especially in how, if you do a big shift between, say, how much commodity is relative to distribution costs and that sort of thing, then you might have to change some of your factors. But for the most part, you can usually utilize a lot of what was done. You rerun the numbers to make sure that it jives with your cost of service, but you don't have to redo the entire cost of service analysis.
So then I'm thinking I should be mentally prepared that when you come back with your, more specific tables with the actual set of rates you intend to implement, that again, it will likely be biased. Bias is maybe an awkward word. It'll be skewed. It'll be larger on the residential end, the amount of increase, than it is on the commercial end. Because my recollection is that's how it was the last time.
No, the rebalancing happens once. So again, if between last time and this time, if the dynamics haven't changed, if you bring forth an 11% or 12% rate increase, it would almost be closer to 12% across the board.
Across the board.
Everybody, yes.
Okay, got it. And one last question. When we talked about putting power lines underground, one of the things that came up was that there's a lot of value in having complementary telemetry, so that if you have a failure, you know where it happened. Otherwise, the underground lines can be a little bit more expensive to maintain. When you listed out smart grid equipment on the list of things that this would fund, is that starting to be one of those items, or is this more of the automated telemetry and billing to individual houses and buildings?
No, I think that's something that we're going to be looking at. It's in those costs as we move forward because of the smart grid. We'll be able to look at our assets and then be able to look at where the transformer or where whatever feeder line or whatever distribution line it's at. And then also, the advantage is you can ping the next door neighbor's home, you can look at, what area that, and so the response time and everything else from a reliability standpoint will be increased then.
Okay, so that's exciting. Okay, thank you.
So I've got a couple of questions that I see as related. We're going to be increasing prices. How is the public going to react to these in terms of a usage? Are we relatively inelastic and we can get away with anything in raising prices on use? Or I'm not talking about the public reaction to it yet. I just want to know how responsive to cost things are. And obviously it's going to vary with what we're regulating, but is that likely?
Well, I think with the electric, it was a situation where what we can chalk up a lot of what happened with the reduction in revenues from what we thought was a possible elasticity effect. Again, when you get to the water and gas side of the equation, we do rate changes there much more frequently. Every year, gas actually changes every month. So I think people are, to a certain extent, they expect the prices are going to change. With electric, it had been a long time since we'd done a price change. And so when we changed them, we saw a reduction about 6% from where we thought things were going to be. Is it possible that we'll see more of a reduction? It is possible. And then that will factor into decisions as we go forward. Well, we do expect a little bit of an elasticity effect whenever we change rates. But again, because it was so long in the electric side, difficult to gauge what the final effect is really going to be. So, and as John mentions, we're to a certain extent, we're in a unique case here because all of our utilities show up on one bill. So it's a little bit difficult for people to differentiate, I had, this is all due to water rate increases, or this is all due to electric rate increases. And in some cases, we see that people cut usage wherever they can across the board. And so we have seen it even when we raise rates because of water for drought, that electricity usage goes down a little bit because people just start generally conserving. Which is a good thing, but there's always a little bit of a cross effect even here with regards to our utilities, so that adds some challenges.
So the second question, my whole adult life we've been confronted where most people on this commission, I suspect, and most people in Palo Alto want us to save in all these resources, use less. In the sensitivity analysis, is there a way to determine how close we are to a risk? Well, the risk I'm talking about is as you reduce, you start escalating the price. Is there some spot where it really becomes a severe problem? So what I'm talking about is as you reduce electricity use, you've got to jack up the price to cover your fixed cost, and closer, the more you conserve. I first confronted it when I headed the state garbage board, and we told the cities to push all of the costs of recycling and other programs off on garbage. But some places, and I suspect Palo Alto is one of them, it's not a lot of garbage left to foist the cost on it, and the impacts of more conservation recycling can be pretty intense. So I'm just trying to find whether there's some areas that's a real risk.
Well, I think that at least the discussion of that concept, and I'll use the term only because among terms that aren't real helpful, the death spiral effect is I think what we're referring to here is perhaps most relevant in the context of a gas utility. But again, as the earlier discussion, the likelihood of that actually happening in the near term, or even to a certain extent somewhat foreseeable, is speculative. And so I think to your point.
Does speculative mean
unlikely.
really remote.
Really, really remote. I like that. I like
To
that.
like a 51%.
Well, I guess I give up on forecasting the future, so I can't say that with a great deal of confidence. It's just that based upon what we see today and the dynamics we see in play, really don't see that phenomenon being a real risk, certainly near term.
Hit the wrong button. So I think this is one of the reasons why electrification of transportation is such an interesting thing, because it gives you increased revenue, but because you're displacing gasoline, the impact on the environment is incredibly positive. So that's why I think the more we can do to facilitate electrification of transportation, that is going to give us a really big bump and do the things to sort of spread the fixed costs over a wider thing. Because right now, we only have really conservation as the way. We don't give people information. We're not doing price triggers. We're not asking, we don't have any of those behavioral mechanisms other than the price going up. And so that's an effect, a price trigger, why people are using less. And so if they now have an electric car and they can do something with it, then that gives it value, and it also gets the revenue up, and it's a win-win in my opinion.
Sorry to drag out the same topic. I too am interested in asking questions about the reduction in usage that you observed last year. Did I hear 6%? That was how much electric usage came down? Has it ever dropped before, or was this a first for the Palo Alto utility?
Oh, it's dropped before. It's just it was in conjunction with the rate change to see the drop as well.
Was there a difference in residential versus commercial, or any other sort of way of analyzing where usage went down versus not?
It was across the board, a little bit more on the commercial sector actually than on the residential sector.
And then I know we're going to talk about efficiency programs later tonight. Is there any way? Do you have any data or anecdotal evidence about some of that being efficiency measures?
I don't have it as part of my mind right now tonight, so it's small, I would imagine, but we can try to work more of that into the final financial plan when we bring it to you to have some discussion on it.
And my only other question is back to borrowing $10 million from the Special Projects Reserve. The only question I have is, do you have a sense of what the rate increase would have to be if the city didn't provide that loan from one reserve to another?
I did not calculate that for tonight. No, not offhand. But again, I can bring that to you as an alternative to show what that would be. Again, with the perspective, though, of bringing things back to target over the course of a financial planning period, it would be something incredibly steep, a very large increase, followed by what you'd then eventually have would be this very, like, say, 20% rate increases, driving revenues up, and then you'd have to have rate decreases to bring things back down to normal.
Once the reserve was full,
yes,
and you didn't, right?
yeah,
Because that's not, filling the reserve is not an ongoing.
Yeah, we don't like to yo-yo as much as possible.
Right,
so.
no, that makes sense. What kinds of things are considered special projects that would otherwise be there for?
Special projects are, I believe those are approved by UAC and council as to what can be used by within the Special Projects Fund, so. Yeah, the two primary contenders I mentioned were the second transmission line as well as smart grid, so.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I hadn't connected those two, thanks.
Just to follow on to Commissioner Trumbull and Forcell's questions, so it might be helpful if we knew what the demand or assumptions in general were, what the basis for use, demand, and cost. Just if you were able to tell really for each one, we're assuming this sort of growth or of demand and this sort of growth of costs or whatever, that might be helpful for us to know, and like what that's based on, like the growth in demand for electric is going to be less of a loss than last year, or it's going to be a growth because of the year before, or what, you know what I'm getting at. Another item is, in the past, I've seen where the utility has transferred funds to the city's general fund. And I'm wondering if any of that's going on here, and should that be considered in the rate making?
So actually here you can see transfers to the general fund. This light blue line here are transfers. Not just to the general fund, but also transfers in general that we have to some, occasionally, again, when we do, there are some small transfers in there for when we do capital projects that everything gets funded out of one particular utility and we pay back others, and vice versa. But the majority of that is transfers to general fund there. The equity transfer, yes. So, and that exists also on the gas side. I can flip to that slide relatively quick. So that's the green line there.
And can you just briefly say what that is?
Yeah, I think the key point to say here is that this is a transfer to the general fund that effectively it's a return on equity, on the original equity investment in the system. It's a methodology that we set many years ago, around 2009, and we haven't changed it since. It's set according to a specific formula, and we included in the projections exactly according to that formula.
So if it's repaying, is there an end to the repaying?
There isn't. It's similar to any other original investment.
And how does that play into cost of service?
I'm going to defer, maybe, would you like to take that?
So I think that it's something, I think Jonathan makes some important points about how it was established as part of the system here. And so it plays into cost of service in that, and we established our rates and did our cost of service analysis. This return on equity concept was part of that cost of service and then sort of embedded in one of the costs that we agreed through City Council resolution to be providing as part of the utility service.
And again, it's a fairly standard thing that if a utility doesn't pay taxes, then they contribute towards the fund of the city. I mean, that's just kind of normal for a muni. Those are the two models.
Did we answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's probably a fundamental thing I just don't fully understand, and so I don't want to take everyone's time based on that. I understand the concept of if we're paying back the original investment, then that is a cost of our service. I don't understand the concept of the original investment. I do sort of get this point, but I want to actually, your answer is probably sufficient in that if it was brought up in 2009 and it's a fully vetted thing, then it's probably fine. But it's just something that's kind of bugged me for a long time, and I haven't had a proper time to bring it up until now.
Over the years, we've worked closely with the Attorney's Office as well as the City Council and other policy boards to establish exactly how that transfer will be done.
Yeah, it just struck me that I get the concept that it's a cash cow, and I just didn't understand in a time when there's no rate increases. Yes, it's sort of more obviously a cash cow when you're then charging the cash cow. When you're increasing revenues on the back of ratepayers to fund the cash cow, it doesn't feel as much like a cash cow.
It's important to sort of understand public reaction. So if everybody was up in arms, you might take a different position or explain it more fully than if people are just fine with it. So that's why I think that's good for us to know. You know, this is not something that people who know I'm a commissioner come up and ask me about or say something to me. So, and I think if it was a pain point, there might be somebody do that, but I'm just trying to find out if there are other things that I just don't have visibility to.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make one, I think we're sort of referring to it in kind of an informal way, but just sort of characterizing it as a cash cow is something that, you know, I wanted to just go back to Jonathan's earlier point that it's a very specific formula that we adopted in 2009 that's grounded in a very specific kind of formulation and concept of return on investment. And so it's not just some sort of arbitrary amount that's being charged or that's being modified on an annual basis to just kind of account for how revenue flows in either fund. It is what it is, and it's determined based on very specific evidence.
And I think things have, you know, certainly people on the commission and people on the council have changed, but I know this has come up in joint discussions with past commissions and the council, and it's generally been agreed on as a settled part of the electric and gas rate structures.
Very well. Any other comments or questions on this item? This is just a discussion item, so there's no vote. I wanted to say what I should have said in the beginning, or thank you, Eric, for the presentation. Very thorough, and appreciate all your work on this. Thanks. All right, so the next item on the agenda is to go back to the number 1 on the printed agenda. And I will make a quick exit right now. I have to leave. Sorry to leave early, but I've asked Commissioner Ballantyne, who is the first person here on the dais, if he would please continue running the meeting in my behalf. Thanks very much.
So while we're setting up, I'll just make the general comment that I think our seniority now is at something like 13 or 14 months.
All right, thank you, commissioners. We have. I thought Phil was going to make the presentation, and I'm shocked to see Jamie there. Go ahead.
Show you, Kurt, but so we've got a couple people. I'm Phil Boble, Assistant Director.
You got to speak into the microphone.
Here, I'll come over to Jamie. So I'm Phil Boble, Assistant Director of Public Works for the Environmental Services, and part of Environmental Services is the treatment plant. And actually, just to give you, new commissioner, the big picture, the Public Works Department has 3 enterprise funds that impact the public with rates. One of them is the treatment plant, the second one is the stormwater fund, and the third one is refuse, what we now call the zero waste, those 3 funds. So the treatment fund is managed by the Public Works Department, and as Eric explained moments ago, one of the charges to the fund that's called the collection system fund, the wastewater collection system fund, one of the bills that it has to pay is Palo Alto's portion, which is about 35% of the treatment plant costs. So think of that as like 2 funds, the treatment plant and wastewater collection, but the collection system having to pay Palo Alto's share to the treatment fund. So we've got a couple people with us tonight. That was your sort of big picture overview. The folks we have with us tonight is Jamie Allen, our plant manager, who's sitting next to me, and Patton, our senior engineer, is in the audience. And so I'm going to ask, this is kind of a complicated point that we're bringing to you, that we had to make a change in response to the state in order to get a loan for our next big, approximately $25 million project at the sewage treatment plant, and some planning money for the 3 projects that'll follow it. So I'm going to ask Jamie to explain this change we've got to make to you, and then we'll see what questions you have.
Good evening. So the city has sewage sludge incinerators to burn its sludge. It's been burning sludge since 1972. We have a project to retire the incinerators by 2019 with a new sludge dewatering and truck load out facility. That project is approximately $28 million or so. We're asking for a $30 million construction loan from the state. It's a low interest loan. Right now the rate's about 1.7%. It's a great financial instrument because it has grant equivalents built into it compared to a revenue bond. We're also asking for a $6.75 million planning and design loan for 3 important projects as part of our overall capital plan, and that's on a 10-year loan. Those loan applications have been submitted to the state, and the city requested that the debt coverage for that be from the wastewater treatment fund. It was a strategy we used to see if they would accept that. In the 2007 and 2009 state revolving fund loans that we requested, the coverage was the wastewater treatment fund and the wastewater collection fund. And also in the 1999 revenue bonds for the wastewater treatment plant projects and some storm drain projects, the wastewater collection fund was also pledged. So the state did their calculations and said that they needed both funds pledged consistent with past loans, otherwise we would not receive the state loan. So we are repealing the original ordinance that we're going to go to council with your recommendation to repeal the original ordinance, just pledging the wastewater treatment fund as pledged revenue, and then ask for both wastewater treatment fund and wastewater collection fund as pledged revenues.
So just to make the terminology, Jamie said ordinance. What he really meant was resolution.
Did I say ordinance?
So what was adopted originally
Right, a resolution.
by council, we're repealing, we're asking for your
Repealing the
recommendation
resolution.
to go back to council and repeal the original one, and to have a substitute one adopted by council, and your recommendation to do that is what's requested tonight, so that we repeal the old resolution, we adopt a new one, and we have the revenues for both of the 2 funds that I was describing to you with my hands, the revenues for both of those 2 be pledged with respect to the loans, the 2 loans.
And our other 5 contributing partner agencies have all promised to repay their portion of the loan. So this is consistent with what the other 5 partners have done.
So you saw the bottom line of this is that we don't think it affects either fund because we have our partners pledging the payback. This is like belts and suspenders on the part of state government, right, which you won't be shocked to hear, that in addition to us having these agreements to have our partners pay back these loans, they want the actual revenue to the 2 funds to also be pledged. Frankly, it's overkill, and it's even, you could say, it's sort of double counting. But that's what they insist on, and the reason why we're going along with it is their interest rate is roughly half of what bonds would be. So if we went to the bond market, we'd pay about 4%. Here, if we could get this thing tomorrow, we'd pay 1.7. We're predicting in your staff report, we said 1.8 because things are rising. We want to catch it as soon as we can, because if we're not careful, it'll even go above 1.8.
And this resolution is a key document that they need in order to complete their review so we can start the eligibility date for our loan. And the construction project is out to bid to contractors. We're receiving bids in about 2 weeks. And then we'll take that to council for award.
So sorry that this is a little bit complicated. The bottom line and hopefully we stated it clearly in the staff report, is we're asking for your recommendation to council to repeal the original resolution and adopt this new one that pledges both of these two funds' revenues for, should there be a problem with repayment of the state loans.
Okay, so before we get to questions or comments, we do have at least one public comment. Herb, if you want to go ahead and speak.
Acting Chair Ballantyne and Commissioners, since the state feels that it's necessary for the net revenues from collection to be pledged, I'm surprised that it's just Palo Alto's share that is being pledged. You know, we have these agreements with the partners for them to pay their share, but that's between them and us. That's not them pledging their net revenues to the state. And as long as you're going to the trouble of doing this, it would seem that we shouldn't be the only ones, since we're 38% of the fund's expenses, and that the partners as well should be pledging the net revenues of their collection utilities, however called, so that there's some equity in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So through the chair, I'd like either Mr. Allen or Mr. Boble just to respond to that.
The state did request that we have agreements with our partners to promise to repay. We have gotten all the partners to promise to repay. We provided those documents to the state as part of their financial review, and they were satisfied with those as part of a review for a loan.
Okay, any other public comments? Other questions?
I just want to confirm my understanding of what you're telling us is that there's no additional revenue being required from the city. We're really just pledging an additional source of collateral for repayment of these loans.
Yeah. At worst, that's what we're doing. At most, we're really just sort of double counting. I mean, I wouldn't tell the state this because then they'd fly off in some other direction. But, we've already pledged the partners. One of those partners is the collection system fund, Palo Alto. So we've got that revenue stream already pledged, but that's the same revenue stream that comes into the collection system from our ratepayers, right? The ratepayers pay into the collection fund, and then that money goes to our treatment. So I would argue it's really double counting on the state's part, but I don't want to try to argue with them.
So is there an additional risk or additional downside to the city for approving?
There is the remote potential that if you didn't buy my double counting argument and you viewed this as the first time that Palo Alto's ratepayers' payments have been pledged, like I say, I've got an argument that that's not the case. But if you believe that this is the first time that the ratepayers' revenue has been pledged, then there is the possibility that the collection system would want to get a bond or get some kind of loan themselves, and their rate would be go up. The bond rate would go up because there was this previous pledge that would be that would trump the, excuse me, that would, what's another word there? Supersede, thank you. Supersede the other. So.
And the city has pledged the wastewater collection to both the state twice before and to the private revenue bonds. So we've used that before to get the best interest rate.
Yeah.
The state will not give us this loan without this pledge.
Right. And that's why it's difficult to argue with the state. We've done this in the past, as Jamie described, 3 times now. Although, as Mr. Borak pointed out, it's a little weird. We have these partners, and the state's not used to that. With respect to a city, they're used to the model where the city, the collection system is coincident with the treatment plant entity.
Some agencies.
Yeah, some are different. San Jose is an example that's like us, but they're not in their heads thinking of that model. So the easy thing for them to do is say, well, this is all like one big fund. It's wastewater. Yeah, you're collecting it and you're treating it, but it's really just one big thing. And that's the way the state looks at it. It's one system, and you ought to be pledging all the revenues of that system.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have one more question. So if I understand, I think it's Exhibit F, the schedule of system obligations, the obligation for this pledge would be junior to, it's already pledged against 1995 utility revenue bonds and 1999 utility.
Right.
Has it ever been called upon to repay either of those bond obligations?
Pardon? The 99 bonds are senior to this one.
Right.
Right.
So so this one is junior to those
Correct.
two.
The state wanted it to be on equal parity, but the bond insurance company said that we'd have to pay a default fee or a penalty, and it just was not going to happen.
Okay. And then my only other question is, well, I assume this state will be okay with it being, that's not what you're asking
Yes,
us to
they're
evaluate. But my
accepting-
question is, has the wastewater collection fund that is pledged against these utility revenue bonds ever been called upon
I mean, for your
to
bonds.
repay those bonds?
No,
Does that question even make sense?
it does. And
Okay.
no, it has
Okay.
never happened.
Okay.
We've never defaulted on anything. So,
Right, okay. So what is the primary source of funds that we use to repay this loan, or these two loans, the $25 million loan and the
The
$10 million
wastewater
loan?
treatment fund. And we would collect money from all 6 partners.
Okay,
and one of those partners is Palo Alto. That's why I was saying it's kind of sort of double counting here, because we are depending on the payment from the collection system fund to the treatment fund.
Right.
Palo Alto's 35% share.
okay.
So we're committed to that. And the other partners are committed to their share. And that really is that's where the payment, to answer your question, that's where the payment comes from.
Right.
The payment to repay. And we've been repaying these other 2 loans and the bonds without a glitch.
And forgive me for not being familiar enough with my own bill, but do we line item wastewater collection versus wastewater treatment on people? Are those two separate
You
rates
just
that they
see
pay?
something that looks like wastewater.
Okay.
Right on your home.
It
your
says
sewer
Yeah.
bill.
sewer. I think it says sewer, doesn't it, John?
Okay, so they're not broken out in terms of
No.
the public be having
No.
any awareness that, got it?
No, it's just a single sewer wastewater rate.
Okay.
Other question? Commissioner Trumbull?
No, I was ready to second Ms. Schwartz's motion.
All right, I guess we don't need any further discussion. Commissioner Schwartz?
So I just move that we accept the recommendation.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any dissenters? No? Unanimous? 5-0. So next up, we have, as written, agenda item number 2, which is a discussion item on the amendment to Utilities Rule and Regulation 27.
So before you tonight, that we are going to talk about a little bit is the regulations amendments to 27. There's some staff folks that we brought along here, Tom Ting and Mike Mesh, to discuss the changes that you'll see before you. And all it is just going to be is a little short presentation to talk about this. So are you guys ready?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tom Ting. I'm the Electric Engineering Manager.
My name is Mike Mintz. I'm a senior engineer.
We're here to this evening to give you a brief overview of an amendment to Rule and Regulation 27, which is on generator facility interconnection, and then we'll be able to answer any questions you may have. As the title describes, describes the interconnection, metering, and operation requirements for generating facilities connected to the utility electric system. Back in 2015, Mike headed up an effort with a consultant to help us not only review the rule, but also to develop some training for our engineers to be able to see how do we handle generating facilities tied into our distribution system. The rule is generally consistent with CPUC Rule 21 and also with IEEE 1547, which is the industry standard for distribution or generating systems on distribution systems. This was presented to Council in December of 2016 and was passed on a resolution. Prior to that, the last update was in April of 2012. So we took on this effort not only to look at the rule and to get training, but also to try to comply or go along with the overall effort by the city to address PV applications, to try to streamline the process. We know the Development Services Group has made a lot of effort in trying to attract contractors in here to do this. We felt we need to look at our own and try to do our part to that. We also wanted to make sure we stayed consistent with the other utilities in our area. PG&E, basically, they've updated their Rule 21 or through the PUC. That was recently adopted in June of 2016. So, and then there also have been advances in technology that we want to make sure that our rule tried to address. As part of training our engineers, we wanted to better define our requirements, timelines, and the criteria that we use to screen it, to make sure that we were consistent amongst all of our engineers in terms of how we looked at our projects. And then also, by being more consistent and training everybody, we hope to improve our ability to address any future applications.
Some of the significant changes made to Rule 27 were focused on clarification of the submittal requirements, the review process, and the timelines. As Tom mentioned, we wanted to make sure Rule 27 reflects the city's efforts to streamline and fast-track small PV projects, but at the same time make sure we adequately document the interconnection of our larger projects. We added smart inverter requirements to Section D to keep up with changes in inverter technology. UL 1741 Supplement A testing and certification program, was approved in September of 2016. Going forward, inverters will need to comply with this requirement within 12 months from the date, from this date. We removed the supplemental review criteria in Section G because we thought it was overly technical and lacked clarity and made Rule 27 somewhat large and cumbersome. We feel that if a project fills a specific review screen, that it's best just to contact a customer directly and provide our recommendations or on any changes or additional requirements which will allow a project to move forward. And finally, we added new terms to Rule 2, which was approved in mid-2016. During the legal review of Rule 27, it was pointed out that there were terms being used which needed to be defined in Rule 2. That's all I have to present. We're open to any questions you might have for us.
If I might, just to provide a little bit of context, given the prior UAC discussions around inverters and their connection with the system, we thought this was simply a good opportunity to even point out the existence of these rules. They're posted on the Utilities Department portion of the city's website and effectively guide the procedures through which we interact with customers on an ongoing basis. And as Dean and Tom pointed out, they have analogies with regulations at the CPUC level.
Okay, any public comments? I don't have any cards. So moving on to any questions. Commissioner Schwartz?
So when you say generation, are we just talking rooftop PV or canopy PVs? Is that the only kind of generation we have within the city?
No, I forgot to mention, in Palo Alto, yes, that's predominantly what we have, but the rule addresses all types of generation.
Okay,
Any
so-
type of
so-
induction generator.
So would this apply to the anaerobic digester when it comes on?
Yes.
Okay. And then, do we have any microgrids existing in the city that might require a black start or something like that?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
Okay, any others? Otherwise, I'll. Thanks very much for the update, and I really appreciate having it on the agenda. It gives me an opportunity to say one or two things that I think are very important, but I'll keep them brief. First of all, I think it's tremendous that you've done the work to figure out how to adopt our Rule 27 following the guidance of Rule 21. As I look at what other utilities have, I think in California, Rule 21 strikes me as rather unique and a tremendous asset for being able to leverage distributed generation to make management of the set of utilities more straightforward for all parties involved. So thanks very much for the hard work to create our Rule 27. Secondly, when we think back on the guidance from City Council to adopt more things like residential PV installations in order to support electrical resiliency and reliability, what you've got in terms of your implementation of a new rule that aligns with the new IEEE 1547 is an ability for those inverters, as they comply going forward, to stay tied to a grid which is in a suffering state. And when you look at the previous standards, those conditions were really blocked by the old IEEE 1547. So you'd have a condition where the voltage of the grid might be dropping, and by rule, inverters were disconnecting. And that's one of the things we discussed some months back. So I really appreciate the work that went into creating the new Rule 21. I've even heard the language, instead of smart inverter, which I think makes it sound like it's all about the inverter, I've heard people use the phrase more and more of grid support features in inverters, and I kind of like the sound of that, because that's a lot of what you have going on. Of course, it doesn't have to all be about inverters. These same guidance items would apply to any and all distributed generators, and then set us up nicely to start having more and more microgrids. So, all right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And I think now we're on to agenda item number 3, which is an action item, and that's the recommendation that the council approve the update on the 10-year electrical energy efficiency goals.
Okay, I'd like to introduce our resource planner, Lena Perkins, who will be presenting to you on the energy efficiency, 10-year energy efficiency goals.
Good evening, Commissioners. So I'm excited to have this discussion after listening to previous talks. And right now we're going to have the presentation on the staff recommendation that the UAC recommend that Council adopt these updated 10-year energy efficiency goals. An outline of the presentation is here. We'll start with a brief background on why these goals are here, how they are required, the modeling and development that went into the current proposed goals, those proposed goals themselves, the comparison of these proposed goals to previous goals, as well as the impact on retail rates and average bills, and then move to the action item. So a brief background on these electric energy efficiency goals. In 2006, AB 2021 was passed, which required all publicly owned utilities to adopt annual goals for the next 10-year period, establishing energy efficiency targets. And those targets were to be based on the market potential that was cost-effective and feasible within the service territories. So in that case, pursuant to that rule, we have adopted goals every 4 years. You can see the last time we adopted them was in 2012. And these EE programs are funded by state-mandated surcharge, specifically in place to fund this program, among others. And the programs are required to be cost-effective. And as a note, council adoption of some updated electric energy efficiency goals is required by March 15th of this year. The context for this goal-setting exercise, as you may be aware, in 2015, California adopted a landmark energy law, SB 350, and one of the main pillars of this law is a doubling of statewide energy efficiency by 2030. Now, it's important to note that utility EE programs are only one component of achieving the state's goal. And the California Energy Commission themselves has stated that established EE programs like Palo Alto's may have lower potential for cost-effective energy efficiency measures. Once adopted, EE goals will be incorporated into the city's Sustainability Implementation Plan, Integrated Resource Plan, and Long-Term Energy Acquisition Plan. This chart shows our past achievements for our EE programs and utilities in the gray bars. And all I want to draw your attention to here is that for most of the past 9 years, we have exceeded the goals that were in place from our programs.
I apologize
Yes.
for the interruption, but is this why the Energy Commission says it might be more difficult for us to get better results?
Among many things. There's a number, this comes from a large computational model that I'll go into in a bit, but yes, among other things, that we have exceeded our goals in the past. For the modeling and development for the EE potential that informed this goal-setting exercise, we used a large computational model that was built by the same consultant and using the same framework as the 2012 model. But in 2017, this model includes the impact of new high-impact, low-cost programs. And by modeling Palo Alto's existing energy efficiency programs combined with these additional low-cost, high-impact programs, we found that there was additional market potential within Palo Alto to allow us to increase our goals somewhat. And as an example here, if you look at this pie chart, all I want to draw your attention to is that the green wedge is essentially modeling some of these new high-impact, low-cost programs, counting the savings from Palo Alto's specific green building ordinance. We have a local energy reach code there that we can begin to claim savings from that, as well as a training for facility managers for our large commercial facilities, that is training them how to operate those large commercial properties more efficiently. And those are very cost-effective programs. That's all in the green, yeah. And the other things to notice here, if you start at the yellow wedge and sweep around to the purple, those are all non-residential programs. We anticipate most of our savings will be from commercial and industrial, in large part because the codes and standards for residential applications are pretty expansive. So the residential will only account for about a quarter, 25%, and in large part those residential savings will be on the behavioral end. So here we see the proposed goals from staff in red. They start at 0.75% of the total electric load, and they escalate every 2 years to up to 0.95% by 2027. And you can see that they are a 20 to 30% increase annually over the 2012 goals, And these are ambitious goals for Palo Alto, and we feel that we have a number of programs in development to meet them while maintaining cost effectiveness and excellent service to customers. And even though they are ambitious, they are even more ambitious when taken in the context that the increasingly stringent California statewide codes and standards are not claimed within these goals. And so showing those, the true impact of our programs is the pink dotted line, and that will be, that shows that our annual goals are greater than 1% annually. So the same goals are shown here in red compared to our actual savings in blue, and the bars are on a per megawatt hour basis with the percentages of the anticipated goals shown for reference. And I just want to note here that in 2012, we did a large data center renovation, and that those savings are not likely to be replicable in the near future. So the impact on retail rates and average customer bills. The impact on the average customer bill is anticipated to be neutral. And by 2027, the retail rate impact could be up to 5%. And it's also important to notice that of this 5% potential rate increase by 2027, that could in large part be mitigated by increased EV charging or any other load growth, because the majority of that retail rate impact is due to this lower electric sales volume splitting the same fixed costs. So with that, I was advised to have a potential proposed motion in front of you, as this is an action item, and these are the annual goals to be adopted. And I would welcome any questions.
Okay, any public comments or questions? Fellow commissioners?
I just had, this is I guess a naive question from a new commissioner, but you say these are aggressive goals, and it's always good to exceed your goals, but you're also saying that it has the potential of increasing the rates. And as I understand it, because we're already carbon neutral, it's not going to lower any greenhouse gas emissions.
So carbon neutral is not the same as zero impact on natural resources, for one thing, because there are impacts beyond carbon on everywhere where renewables are going in. And that is a discussion I'm happy to have with you. I'm not sure if this is the right forum, but the other thing is that these are state mandated programs. That's why we have to submit these goals to the CEC. And so that 2.85% of retail of revenue that's dedicated to programs, that's public benefits, and there's only 4 buckets of money that can be used for. And energy efficiency has really been reprioritized. I would say, I mean, it's always been a priority, but and these energy efficiency goals, a number of our programs, like saving energy in city facilities, will actually keep more money in the general fund, and we can claim those savings. So that is something, and a number of our programs that we're investigating, including a conservation voltage reduction, would also save electricity and savings throughout.
So the state tells us we have to adopt goals. They don't specify the goals that we have to adopt.
They specify that they have to be based on our market potential. And there's a lot of modeling that goes into this. And just for context, some of the compensation for PG&E shareholders is actually pegged to their energy efficiency achievements. So not just the goals they set, but how much they actually deliver. And so this is a very highly researched area, and I take your point.
So we're basing our particular goals on the market potential for Palo Alto.
Correct.
I would also just add 2 things. First, it's important to make a distinction between rates and bills. One of the great things about, we talked about Art Rosenfeld, one of the other great charts that we see is not only has per capita consumption stayed the same, but while California electricity rates have gone up really significantly, bills have actually stayed relatively flat relative to the rest of the country. So rates may go up, bills will stay down. And the one other thing that I'd say is that there is a value to energy efficiency, even if it's not reducing carbon, in that it helps with the efficient use of capacity. So our distribution system, we avoid distribution upgrades, we can incorporate more electric vehicles, more load growth, so it's valuable in that sense.
That's helpful, thanks.
So I have some questions about the specifics, because I just wonder why we're being so much more aggressive than we need to meet the state standards, is one question.
So the state has asked for visibility into all of the public-owned utilities models and their assumptions, and staff has participated in workshops, in a number in January as well, and the state is considering setting utility-specific sub-targets for these annual goals, and so I think that staff is very interested in pursuing the most cost-effective savings to be had while being a leader in energy efficiency, as we always have. But again, there's always an eye towards saving energy where it's going to enable other load growth and at different times. So as John was saying, we are actually making room for more electric vehicle charging, and there's also a temporal aspect to where we save energy, as well as the city facilities, which are a substantial part of the city load and would amount to more money staying in the general fund.
Okay, so I had an exchange after I saw an article in one of the trade publications about that Silicon Valley Power made the point that their energy efficiency programs were not cost effective. So I asked what were ours, and so I got the answer back from Bruce, where's his, Lesh. Oh, hi Bruce. Hi Bruce. I got a very thorough answer from Bruce. And apparently ours aren't either, which I guess is reinforced in what you said in the presentation. Could you go back to the pie chart? So here's, oh yeah, okay. So in the document that you guys sent out in advance on page 4, okay, you made the point. So this 21% residential behavior changes, which are effectively from the O-Power Home Energy Report, correct?
Correct.
Okay, which, even for utilities that actually have information that's more granular to give to customers, they only get 2% if you're lucky. So I can't believe we're getting more than 1% reduction.
We might be talking about, so this is not 21% of our total load. This is of that 0.6%.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is there's like this minuscule thing that we're getting. It's like when you really look at it holistically, it's teeny, teeny, tiny, okay? And there also are really negative reactions that a lot of consumers, particularly women, have to this judgy kind of comparing to the neighbors, okay? And so my question is, what percentage of the customers are actually getting those home energy reports now?
So we discontinued the home energy reports, but they're 2 years ago, but there is a persistence of that behavioral saving that's been well documented in academic research.
Right.
So it degrades by maybe 15 to 20% a year. And so that is partially what's represented here.
Okay.
We're also investigating a pilot program, which would be the energy lottery, which would be more of a carrot approach rather than a stick. And the whole idea of gamification, which it sounds like you're aware of, can be much more cost-effective and positive engagement with the
So you're
utility.
looking at like Simple Energies program, or?
We are actually, we're in development with this energy lottery, and it's actually with a researcher at the UC system, and it's, he was originally at Duke University, and now he's at UC Irvine. Okay, Irvine and Riverside. I'm not from Southern California, so. Okay, I know.
Okay, so we're
Irvine,
not,
yeah.
so the bottom line is, we're not paying for the OPOW reports anymore?
Correct.
Okay, which is good, because I was just going to say, why are we spending the money for this teeny tiny thing that doesn't really buy as much? Okay, so when you had at the top of the page where you said CPAU also has ongoing program for emerging technologies to evaluate, test, and implement innovative emerging technologies that could help customers manage or reduce energy and water use, is the innovative technology program you're talking about the game that you're developing, or the lottery? Or is there something else?
Yeah, there's the program for emerging technologies, which is housed within utilities.
Okay.
I can send you more information on that. We've had a number of pilot projects as well as letters of support, and we actually are potentially collaborating with Stanford on some new innovative projects.
I'd be interested in hearing what they were. And so, let's see, okay, so that was my question, and then, okay, then I think you've answered my other question. Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question about attachment A, about the Navigant energy efficiency potential model.
Yes.
It talks about the willingness and awareness factor that's used to get from the economic potential down to the market potential.
Yes.
And how sort of sensitive those numbers are to this factor. And I was curious what value gets used for Palo Alto. It mentions here that the unique demographics of Palo Alto. On the other hand, we're projecting 3/4-ish of energy efficiency is going to come from commercial customers. Are the demographics of our commercial customers also unique?
There are. So these willingness and awareness values are actually on a per measure basis. And so each, so they have actually gone through, and the most recent survey was in 2009, and there's actually an RFP out right now by the state to update these values throughout the service throughout the state for different IOUs. So that's on a per measure basis. They're a bit stale since they're from 2009, and they are attempting to capture on a commercial basis or a residential basis how likely, say, that commercial customer is to replace their boiler and things like that. So when, in regards to attachment A, there is upcoming research on the residential side that speaks to how do people actually respond to conservation? Is it something where there's a rebound effect? So they're like, well, I conserved in water, so I don't have to conserve here. Or is it something where it's more ideological and they maybe just view themselves as a conservation person? And then maybe instead of eating up all of the pie and no one has anything left to give into anything, is it more a case of, now I found out how to conserve here, now I'm going to get an electric vehicle, now maybe there's more of a snowballing effect? And that's what I was referring to here in the staff report, and it's an area of active debate, and it will really help to have these new values come out in the next 2 years or so through the state process for updated willingness and awareness.
Because it's my understanding, working in this area, that you do have the people where it's the attitude, where they just want to find out all the things they can do because it's meaningful for them. But then for people who are motivated, say, by cost savings, if they have one program where they successfully reduce their bill, then they say, oh, I'll try something else. And so there is a lot of piggyback effect for, especially for people who have other reasons, and then for people who say, oh my God, that Nest thermostat is so cool, or the Tesla is so beautiful, and they just like it because it's a cool thing and it's automation. There's also those people, and that's, where you get a lot of, the people who want the new toys.
Can you help me with just generally, how are EVs scored in this system?
The CEC released guidelines on the 23rd of January, suggesting, and they are accepting public comments on this, suggesting that EVs not be included in any energy efficiency metrics in these programs.
Right.
So this is not including EVs at all.
Displacing something else.
Right. That was
yeah.
my hunch was that's
Right.
what you would say. So how then do you, because it seems like all of the data that you end up needing to compile is megawatt hour data.
Mm-hmm.
If, say in the case of residential programs or certainly commercial programs like take the non-residential lighting, if over the next, because this is a 10-year thing, if there's, say, the next 2-3 years, a lot of people at campuses or even, people like me start having an EV, that, an interesting story. Everyone at my house started out being pretty happy about having a Nissan Leaf until they figured out that we suddenly got a bad grade on the compare to your neighbor thing. And my son went from being very excited to being pretty mad, like, gee, Dad, why did you charge it at home? So I'm just trying to understand, how do you draw out of the data, since we haven't got smart meter telemetry yet? How do you draw back out of the data whether or not the programs are actually gaining any traction?
All these program achievements are based on the SB 1037 report that we submit annually to the CEC, and so we are actually only allowed to claim savings on a measure-by-measure basis. So, and that's for the savings that we affect. And the only way we know we're affecting those savings, putting aside the residential ones, is if you apply for a rebate from us. So we are counting the savings that we know we have affected from that rebate above the statewide codes and standards. So this is a narrow subset. Now, regarding the residential program, we did an evaluation, verification, and measurement study when we did the O-Power report, and that's where these numbers come from, because that was our residential program at the time, and we have used that as a proxy moving forward. And those are statewide and nationwide research, then verified at Palo Alto levels for what we saw as the actual impact citywide of those O-Power reports. There's a lot. It's an area of active discussion, but this is based on vetted processes.
But you're right in that this is one of the challenges with the whole M&V area, because people are double counting, or somebody says they get this piece, and so they're fighting over, when in fact these things are cumulative, and you can't really break out, like a good marketing program gets you a lot of, you hit the customer at a lot of points, touch points, and so, how do you know which one it was, or that it was their neighbor? And so I think that's one of the challenges. Now, just in the interest of disclosure, so I'm not I'm Navigant, who is the vendor, so I'm about to start a project with Navigant to do an M&V evaluation. That's a 3-year project in Colorado. So it doesn't, so I haven't worked for a Navigant before, so, but if there's anything you need to tell me to recuse myself on or whatever, fine. It's just that I'm working with them.
So just to make sure then that I follow on the points that you're both making, it could very well be that as if we follow along the course of the city council guidance and electrify more and more things, our electrical consumption may actually go up, even though we tally up these programs that have created reductions.
Yes, our load may go up,
may go
but
up.
we will be able to count the savings that, we translate these percentages into forecasted megawatt hours, and that's actually what we report to the CEC. So we won't be handicapped by that.
Okay, I've got it. Thank you. Discussion? Anyone have a motion?
Well, I guess, okay, I mean, it seems to me that the numbers are in effect a little, I don't mean to do this as a poor choice of word, but a little arbitrary. I mean, so they're sort of targets and there's not really a downside. So, you know, in terms of it being a motion that we do, I guess, you know, I don't know that there's like that we could say go away and do any more accurate number because, you know, you're figuring it out. So I guess is that realistically what it is?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, this is a huge, heavy computational model.
Right.
You know, but at the end of the day, the model is only as good as the assumption and the data that goes into it. You know, these are treated very seriously, but we've put a lot of work into this and done various sensitivity analyses. So staff feels like this is a way that we can progress both for the city and its utility.
All right, well,
So I'll move, are we ready?
Yeah, I think we're
I'll
ready.
move the recommended motion on energy efficiency to the council.
I'll second. All right, put it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone not in favor? All right, 5-0.
And Lena, before you leave, am I correct? Is this your first presentation to the UAC?
That is affirmative.
Oh, very good. So after the
anything
fact,
like
I didn't want
this?
to jinx her in acknowledging that fact before she made the presentation, but we're very, very pleased to have Lena. Now, you've been with the city a little over a year, is that correct?
Yep.
After having completed her PhD at Stanford. So we are quite fortunate that she's with our team. Unlike, I'll say, Eric, who's an old hand and been here for a long time, so lots of bruises to prove it. Appreciate having a new face before the UAC and very lively discussion, so thank you.
Thanks very much and congratulations. All right, next item is as written number 5, I believe, and that's the discussion of the property assessed clean energy PACE financing.
As Lisa Benatar gets situated, this is an item just perhaps to lead in for the commission that in some of our prior discussions on topics to bring forward, that we had some discussion of bringing things that were not quite baked. And so this is largely a discussion that has been happening among staff. We've received a number of indications of interest from PACE providers, and that as we've been discussing how best to act on those indications of interest, we thought it would be good to bring the UAC into that conversation. So I apologize for not having a full report in front of you, but we thought it would be in keeping with kind of the state of the staff discussion to then bring it to you. So with that, Lisa Benatar, also your first presentation, I believe, to UAC, is that correct? All right, so I'm not going to jinx you anymore, and so we'll get into it. You have to press.
All right. Hello, my name is Lisa Benatar. Thank you for that introduction, Ed. I guess my presentation is half-baked, but no, we'll see how it goes. So yes, my name's Lisa Benatar. I'm a staff specialist with utilities, and I'll be presenting on property assessed clean energy or PACE financing. As Ed said, the rough goal of this discussion, as a discussion item, is to kind of bring everybody up to speed on the same page as to what PACE financing is. A lot of cities and counties, you may have heard around the state, are authorizing PACE provider to expand PACE programs in their jurisdictions. Palo Alto currently has one PACE provider, California First, that's authorized to operate in Palo Alto. You might say that question would be, should we expand the number of PACE programs in Palo Alto? I guess the best way to think about that is to first understand what they are. So that's the goal of this discussion. I'll start out with a quick bird's eye view of what PACE is and then zoom in a little bit so we can be sure we understand how it works. We'll look briefly at the evolution of PACE in the US and then come back to Palo Alto. So the bird's eye view is, I'm not sure what the background level is of people, but basically PACE is a way for property owners to finance improvements to their properties specifically related to energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water conservation projects without having to qualify for a traditional loan. So the projects are paid for by outside investors that can be public or private, and then the property owners pay back the investors through, they pay back the principal as well as interest and fees through tax assessments on the property tax bills. So it's kind of a unique arrangement, and it requires state legislation. So when a state passes PACE legislation, the state is known as being PACE enabled. California was the first state to be PACE enabled. It's where PACE came to be in 2008. I was going to say something about what was going on in 2008, but anyway, that's when PACE was born. And in addition, local governments need to authorize specific PACE programs to be able to operate within their jurisdiction. So that's kind of why we're here. Let's see now. So to dive in, that's the bird's eye view. To dive in a little bit to how, let's see, you said down. Oh. There we go. Okay, perfect. Excuse me. So this is simple. I know this is, I think, the last presentation. I'm going to keep it fun. So we have property owners and contractors. Property owners presumably want to get something done on their property. Contractors will do the work. We also have PACE providers, which are entities, businesses that administer PACE programs. And then we have these are sort of the characters in the story, Joint Powers Authority, which are JPAs, which can act on behalf of 2 or more cities or other jurisdictions. So how it works is the California legislation states that local governments will authorize, will designate areas within which willing property owners can go into contractual agreements with city officials. So the contractual agreements are actually between property owners and the city officials. The city officials typically go into those agreements through a joint powers authority. So if you look up here, you can see the property owners are going into contract with the city through a JPA, and a PACE provider is administering that process. So you can see the reason I have all these little pictures. It gets a little confusing. So the approval process is much easier than qualifying for a loan. It takes just a couple days. The property owner's credit rating is not considered so much as whether they're current on paying their property taxes, paying their mortgages. So it's a lot easier to qualify. It can be as quick as a couple days. So once that approval process happens and the contract is signed, a contractor can do the work, and then the PACE provider pays the contractor. So then you have to ask, how does the PACE provider get the money? That's when lenders and the county, where they come into the story. Let's see, so the PACE provider behind the scenes is telling, once these contracts are signed, they have an idea of how much the project's going to cost. The PACE provider will tell the JPA how much money is needed. The JPA issues bonds, and then the PACE providers sell off the bonds to lenders and get the money. So now the PACE providers have the money to pay the contractors. How does that money then, how do the lenders get their money back? So the lenders, by the way, typically want to make on the order of 6%-ish on their money. These are typically outside lenders, private investors. They get their money in a flow that you can see kind of like this. The property owners have an extra line item on their property tax bills. So they pay the county peels off the PACE portion, gives it to the PACE provider, who takes some and then pays the lender. So I hope that's clear. That's kind of the workings. Again, now to go to sort of the evolution of PACE, it was actually thought of roughly around 2006, 2007 in Berkeley, a gentleman named Cisco DeVries. Legislation was actually passed in 2008, AB 811. And then in 2009, Palo Alto, along with many other cities and counties, again, think about 2009, it was very hard to get loans for anything. So the fact that this stuff had gone through was really helpful if people wanted to borrow money to do projects. Now, initially, I should say, I think a lot of this, it was thought that the interest rates would be sort of low, cities were involved, but we'll see how that evolved. So Palo Alto was along with many others who authorized California first. Again, the main barriers that this program was thought to overcome were the high upfront costs and long payback periods of many programs. For example, solar, you can think back then was more than double the cost of what it is now. So it especially made sense then when the upfront costs were even higher. So there were a lot of pros to PACE, and you may have heard a lot of positives from Governor Brown, former administration. So the pros included it's easy to qualify. That can be a pro or a con, as we all know. But in any case, it's easy to qualify, so you might get more projects. The PACE provider helps folks get these things done, so they're more likely to happen. They vet the contractors, which just means that they make sure they're licensed, bonded, and insured, so the property owners don't have to worry so much about the contractors that they're working with being falling into those categories. There's some assurance that the cost is reasonable. There are no penalties for repayment, early prepayment. And one of the things that connects to something Lena was saying is you all were asking about, how do cities measure how much greenhouse gases are being avoided by various things they're doing? And that's one of the things that I think a lot of cities find attractive about PACE is the PACE providers will provide reports that'll say, here's a number of projects, and here's how much greenhouse gases are avoided, or here's how many megawatt hours you're saving, that kind of thing. So that's what's appealing to a lot of cities. Theoretically, the added competition of letting in or authorizing a lot more multiple PACE providers in your jurisdiction should, through competition, bring interest rates down. We haven't seen that to be the case so much, but in theory, that would be a reason to let in more PACE providers. In fact, the interest rates remain, these are the cons with PACE, the interest rates remain pretty high, on the order of 8% for and a little bit above for 20-year term agreements. And in our climate, and you all are pretty familiar with this, given our low electricity or our low rates for electricity and gas, it's difficult to find measures that you can implement that then generate savings that pay back, that cover the costs. So especially with those high interest rates, that's going to be challenging. And perhaps one of the most challenging things about PACE is that because they are tax assessments, they are in a senior position to any mortgage. And so that proved to be a real sticking point. And in 2010, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, FHFA, which regulates Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the majority of loans in the U.S., kind of basically put a halt to PACE and said we're not going to back any loans for properties that have PACE liens on them. So things came pretty much to a grinding halt. I spoke to a gentleman in Sonoma County the other day. They have one of the most robust PACE programs, and he said that they literally closed for 5 days while they tried to figure out what to do. Sonoma County, along with the state of California, ended up suing the FHFA. I'll go back to a timeline now. So in 2010, this roadblock pops up. The state sues the FHFA and loses. And then Governor Jerry Brown created a $10 million loan loss reserve, or loss reserve fund, to cover the case of foreclosures or defaults, and just to bring about some peace of mind for folks. And it worked to some extent, although the president of the FHFA wrote a letter to Governor Brown saying this doesn't matter. This loss reserve, it's not like being in senior position, so thanks, but no thanks. And the FHFA still hasn't changed their position to this day. But PACE programs have picked up, partially because some of the PACE providers are agreeing to subordinate. And I have to say, there's a little confusion as to what exactly that means, but sometimes just the optics of these things help help things progress. There also have been various legislation just this past January, just this last month, AB 2693 with consumer protections went into effect. So PACE has picked up. I believe it's actually 35 states now have passed PACE legislation, so they're PACE enabled, although the majority of the activity is in California, which is number one, and then Florida, number two. And actually, I'm going to zoom forward this slide. Now, how do I go back a slide afterwards? Okay, great, perfect. So there has been a lot of activity, you know, even given the FHFA's standing, lots of over $3 billion financed. And so there has been a lot of activity with PACE in general, but how does PACE look in Palo Alto? That's what we want to get to now. So again, in 2009, we authorized, the City Council authorized California First to operate. And from the data that I was able to get, they're supposed to be giving us reports, and they will if you ask them. The most recent, really reliable data that I have was through 2015. Only, let's see, there were 23 applications, so 23 property owners tried to, you know, go into contract. 21 of those were approved, but then in the end, I guess when they saw what it all meant, only 7 projects ended up being funded. So there isn't a ton of demand in Palo Alto for this, you might say, and those were all residential. Okay, so let's look at Palo Alto and why it might be the case that we don't have a lot of demand. As you all know, it's a relatively affluent community. 62%, this is 2014 data, this is household income. 62% of households in Palo Alto had incomes over 100,000. 36% were actually over 200,000 annual income. So that's a lot, that's the majority. 20% actually are have household incomes below 50,000. And then just 18% are somewhere sandwiched in between there in that $50,000 to $100,000 range.
So of those 20%, how many are like students or people and how many of them actually own a home?
Right, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
So I'll keep zooming forward. So for the highest level income folks, they are often eligible for some lower interest loan and like a home equity line of credit. The lowest level income folks would likely be eligible for our residential energy assistance program, which is called REAP. So there are a lot of projects that fall into the category of REAP, like attic insulation, new furnace type thing, and the folks get these things free. So it's a lot better than financing it through PACE. So that's pretty much the 62%. The upper income and the low income folks are most likely not going to be real interested, or it's not going to be really relevant for them. So we're looking at a small slice of the pie, the 18% of folks who fall in that range. And to your point, 42% of Palo Altans are renters, and I would venture to guess that a lot of the folks in those mid-level incomes may be renters. They also may qualify for personal loans. So obviously, if they're renters, PACE is not appropriate. Is that roughly what you were kind of getting at? Okay. So what we can look at is if there aren't a lot of households that PACE really seems relevant for, in any case, if we did want to say, well, maybe there are some though, like maybe we want to make this an option. Let's think about what types of projects PACE would likely help people pay for. So one thing we did is we looked at some numbers from a city fairly similar to ours, Menlo Park, our neighbors. And one of the PACE providers, they did provide this report that showed that Menlo Park has had 11 projects completed, and 8 of those were solar. And I think that the top PACE projects are HVAC, solar, and roofing. And roofing technically shouldn't be eligible because it's not renewable energy, energy efficiency, or water, but a lot of them do roofs anyway. I guess they say they're making them solar ready. I don't know the details. I know Sonoma County does not allow it. In any case, so HVAC there's probably not going to be a lot of demand for HVAC in Palo Alto with our climate, just like we're seeing in Menlo Park. Most of the projects are solar. So I wanted to take a closer look at options for financing solar. I'm not sure if you all have been made aware of this tool called Watt Plan, which is kind of like a Google sunroof, only tailored for your particular utility area. So Google sunroof, as you know, you can enter your address and then drop a pin on your roof and get some options for financing solar. So Watt Plan is a tool that's similar that PG&E uses, and some other municipalities like Roseville, I believe, has it. So Palo Alto just went into contract to get this tool for our customers, and it'll be available in a couple of weeks. We had sort of a sneak peek version, which is what this slide is taken from. I apologize for the small print, but let's see, is there a pointer? I don't know. I guess you get the rough idea. You can get a cursor. There you go. So basically, this is for an address in Palo Alto, a 5 kW, the calculator came up with a 5 kilowatt system, which would have a $20,000 cost. What this calculator does is it shows you what your monthly expenses for the first year would be for these 4 columns. 1, if you do nothing. 2, if you pay cash, or, these other 3 are for if you go solar. You can pay cash, get a loan, or pay for it or do a PPA arrangement. So you can look at your monthly cost for the first year, and then you can't see this really, but this says view breakdown. And if you click on this view breakdown, it will show you over a 20-year term, how much will you be spending on the electricity that the system isn't covering. If it's a system that covers 80% of your electricity, for example, you're still going to have to be buying 20%. So how much are you going to be paying your utility, and then how much are you going to be paying for the financing? The key to focus on here, though, is that the loan rate, the interest rate that they assume is 5%. And that's because major solar providers like Solar City offer 4.99% loans for 20-year loans, interest rates for 20-year loans, 2.99 for 10 years. So this seems like a reasonable number. So I thought we could just compare what it would look like over 20 years if you were financing a solar system using PACE compared to a 5% loan. And as you can see, you'd be paying obviously a lot more, 30% more over the 20 years. And in fact, even compared to a PPA, as far as I could tell, if you click the view breakdown text that I was talking about, you can see that for a PPA over the 20 years, the financing cost will be $22,343, which is still lower than the amount you'd be spending if you did PACE. So that's pretty much it for the presentation. Really just wanted to lay out how PACE works, how it evolved, and then looking at what it most likely would be used for in Palo Alto and who might be interested. So I guess that's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks very much.
Any questions?
I have one question. Do you want public comments or?
Yeah, any public comments? Thanks for that. Okay.
Does it cost the city anything to kind of maintain this PACE infrastructure?
That's an interesting question. I did notice in the resolution that was passed back in 2009, it said something about paying $12,500 to the JPA. Does anyone else know about that? I don't. It's not supposed to cost the city very much.
Does it take up a lot of staff time?
No, I would say that the most staff time that it could take up is if there were people who basically kind of mistakenly thought that it was a government, a government-sponsored program or something, and thought, oh, you approved this, and then they would come to us if they felt like they had received information that was, misleading or anything like that. I think it could take staff time if a city wanted to run its own PACE program, but to my knowledge, it doesn't take up a lot of staff time.
Right. I think that's an accurate conclusion, both in terms of the ongoing staff time as well as the open-endedness of what would happen if there were misunderstandings on the part of residents.
Okay, other questions? All right, thanks very much.
All right.
So I think the only item left is the selection of potential topics for discussion at future meetings, and that's always an action, and yet I don't think we ever generally have a lot of action, do we?
Correct, and I think, let's see, hopefully you have the sheet in front of you. It's our forecast 12-month rolling calendar.
Yep.
I think last month when we brought this forward, the comment was there wasn't much listed, and so we decided we'd remedy that. And at this point, we might frighten you off a bit in terms of what we've got coming, including the strategic plan update. As I mentioned, we've now added it as a standing item, so we'll just carry that through the remainder of the year. There are a few items, perhaps just to call to your attention for our meeting in March. We've got updated financial plan information. Again, we're leading into our busy season as the run-up to the budget comes. Let's see, one note we mentioned earlier, electrification update. This would be a report out through development services as well as utility staff on the results of analysis, current analysis on heat pump water heater and heat pump space heater cost effectiveness analysis. We are planning a fiber to the home update. I believe the Citizens Advisory Committee is taking that up tomorrow. And so we'll have further opportunity for discussion of that. And also tied to the strategic plan update, we've got, well, let me restate that. Listed here, the 2017 Utility Strategic Plan Progress Report is the next opportunity to talk about our upcoming strategic plan. The one before that, Utility Strategic Plan Performance Update, is our quantitative and qualitative report out on the 2011 strategic plan and an update on what's happened there. So we do have quite a few items both in March. In April, actually increases even further. We have listed, also just to call to your attention, second to the last item there, the SCAP, Sustainability Climate Action Plan, Sustainability Implementation Plans. So as a follow-on to the Council's adoption of the 80 by 30 goal, the next step for what will be coming back from staff is specific implementation plans listed here, water management and electrification, as a couple of specific topic areas that will be coming back to the council, so we thought it would be a good opportunity to bring it back to UAC. So again, a pretty full dance card as it shapes up through the spring and beyond.
Okay, so I don't think we actually have to do anything, correct?
Correct.
All right, so in that case, next meeting is March 1st, and meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone.